Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, February 10th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Now, if you've been watching any of my recent videos on this channel, I've been talking quite a bit about the open Senate race in Michigan come the 2026 election year because Gary Peters, the 66-year-old incumbent Democrat from the state, recently announced last week that he would not be running for re-election in the 2026 year, thus giving Democrats an opportunity to replace him in the U.S. Senate, but also opening up the opportunity for potential top Democrats like Pete Buttigieg and Gretchen Whitmer to enter into the U.S. Senate right before the 2028 presidential election. But something that seems to have been lost in this massive news cycle, and some of you guys actually commented on it in speculation, and also just as a suggestion for something for me to cover on this channel, but Gretchen Whitmer announced almost immediately after Gary Peters decided that he was stepping down that she would not be running for the U.S. Senate seat, which ultimately means that it's Pete Buttigieg's seat as of now to take if he can win the general election. But we already talked about Mayor Pete and moving from Indiana to Michigan and the logistics of that, the electability of his candidacy, the viability rather of his candidacy. But again, lost in this all is the fact that Gretchen Whitmer, a popular Democratic incumbent who would be all but a shoo-in for the Senate race, is now passing up this Senate seat for reasons that are seemingly unknown, but are quite obvious if you take a deeper look at what Gretchen Whitmer's ambitions are post-2026 midterm elections. It very much seems that Gretchen Whitmer is bypassing this Senate race to not jump from governor to senator, but instead focus her efforts on running to be the next president of the United States. We saw early signs that Gretchen Whitmer was going to be extremely involved in future presidential elections. 2024, she declined any offer to replace President Biden and was clearly not interested in going to primary him or coming close to even trying to challenge President Biden's authority. She stuck by President Biden in his amidst calls for him to drop out of the race and even co-chaired his national campaign as one of the few elected officials to do so. Then, in 2023, she founded the Fight Like Hell PAC, which is Gretchen Whitmer's political action committee that is focused on reproductive freedoms, advocating for women's rights, and just generally speaking, advocating for the candidates that Gretchen Whitmer endorses in elections all across the United States. And she was a national surrogate for Kamala Harris, and then, of course, when it was Biden, before July 21st, when he was in the race, and Gretchen Whitmer's involvement in the 2024 election, and arguably Democratic candidacies since 2018, cannot be understated. But Whitmer, again, not running for the Senate seat means she is about to ramp up her presidential election bid. On one hand, I could see benefit of her being in the U.S. Senate. On the other, it would take away a lot of time. You'd be focused on Washington, D.C. rather than running for president of the United States. You'd be focused on flying to and from Michigan rather than having your home base in Michigan. Gretchen Whitmer probably saw this for a variety of different reasons as something that might be a hindrance to a presidential campaign, though many political analysts argue that it helps that she comes not only from the experience of governing from the state of Michigan, but also being someone who has been elected for a more nationalized seat, thus the U.S. Senate race, but also, too, has the experience in two chambers, the executive two branches of government, the executive, her governorship, and the legislative, the Senate bid that would end up being likely successful and would be her time in the U.S. Senate. But 2028 is arguably, for many of these candidates, right around the corner, and I know that seems quite insane thinking about, but the 2024 election we knew was more likely going to be a rematch than anything else, and practically was a rematch of the Biden-era Democrats and the Trump-era Republicans in the 2024 presidential election, and the race for that began almost immediately. And in 2028, things are no different. Given there are two open races, meaning Democrats and Republicans do not have a clear frontrunner right now, besides, of course, Vice President Kamala Harris and Vice President Vance, both of which are the respective frontrunners at this point for 2028. It's not clear enough like it was for then Secretary Hillary Clinton or other presidential candidates who have come into the election with very early leads very early on. Things really do change ahead of 2028, but I can guarantee you every single one of these governors that is in this potential Democratic candidates list, nearly all of the senators, a lot of these representatives, and even TV personalities are actively considering the 2028 presidential election, and Gretchen Whitmer is no different. Now, looking at those who might run in 2028, there's a lot of people who consistently keep up this speculation that they might run, and it's very possible that they do. I remember back in the 2020 presidential election that every single person decided they wanted to run for president on the Democratic side. It was very similar to the Republicans in 2016, given that they had a pretty open race. Hillary Clinton was almost always going to be the Democratic Party nominee here. But in 2020, it wasn't always Biden. And when you take a look at the 2020 Democratic presidential primaries, there were a lot of candidates that decided that they wanted to run. Biden, of course, who won the nomination, but there was Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard, who is now going to be likely in Donald Trump's cabinet, Elizabeth Warren, Michael Bloomberg, Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, Tom Steyer, Deval Patrick, Michael Bennett, Andrew Yang, John Delaney, Cory Booker, Marianne Williamson, Julian Castro, Kamala Harris, Steve Bullock, Joe Sestak, Wayne Messam, Beto O'Rourke, Tim Ryan, Bill de Blasio, Kirsten Gillibrand, Seth Moulton, Jay Inslee, John Hickenlooper, Mike Gravel, Eric Swalwell, Richard Ojeda. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so it's really interesting to see, back then, in 2020, there were so many people who decided that they wanted to run. And so now this time around, as we're looking to the 2028 presidential election, I honestly expect it to be not different, right? I think there will be a number of Republicans who run, but I think a lot of Democrats will too. Now, shifting back the focus to Gretchen Whitmer, why does it matter that she's not running for Senate? Well, I already told you that there are certainly reasons that she would pass up this bid. I think the simple answer, if we're looking at it purely from someone who could come into this as, I have all different levels of experience, sure. Whitmer might benefit from being elevated to a national stage. She might make a name for herself in, confirmation hearings if there's a replacement cabinet nominee or there's a Supreme Court justice opening from, one of the Republican justices. I mean, there are a number of reasons to think that Whitmer could have a more national presence if she runs for Senate, but in terms of time, a whole lot less of it if she enters into the U.S. Senate. And the 2026 race too, and I think this is something that we don't really talk about. Although Whitmer has had extremely impressive victories in the past. I mean, in 2018, she defeated the incumbent attorney general by a pretty significant margin. I mean, we saw here that she won by roughly 10 points across the state of Michigan in 2018. But it was 2018. It was one of the best years of the 21st century for the Democratic Party in a midterm. I mean, it was a really, really strong showing. And 2018, again, not only Michigan, but Wisconsin was pretty significant for Democrats, especially in the Senate race. Pennsylvania was especially large. And looking at the change in 2018 versus 2024, I mean, I think about the Senate races that were up in 2018 compared to 2024, right? Michigan in 2024, Donald Trump won the state by a margin of roughly 2 percentage points. But when it comes down to the Senate race here, reminder that Democrats in 2018 won the Michigan Senate race by a margin of roughly 7 points. In fact, larger than 7 points, Elisa Slotkin only wins by 0.3. And even more jarring, I think, especially too, for Gretchen Whitmer, and I'll talk about why that will be, is that Dave McCormick defeated Bob Casey, despite in 2018, Bob Casey winning the state of Pennsylvania by 12 points. So as a matter of circumstance in 2018, Gretchen Whitmer, combined with the fact that she was a uniquely strong candidate for the state, was able to win by 10 points. But then fast forward to 2022, a year that on the national average, based on popular vote from 2018, was an 11-point swing from 2018. Well, what happened in 2022? Gretchen Whitmer won by an even bigger margin. She won by roughly 11 points in 2022. But you have to ask why. On one end, Gretchen Whitmer, again, a uniquely powerful candidate in the state of Michigan. That cannot be understated. But the 11-point margin was largely accompanied by what was happening in terms of ballot measures across the state. Proposal 3, constitutional right to reproductive freedom. Tens of millions of dollars was funneled into the state of Michigan to boost voters to vote on a proposition that was around the issue of abortion. And unsurprisingly, the counties that voted for Whitmer were very close to the counties that voted for the right to reproductive freedom in the state of Michigan. Very limited examples, and in most cases, changes in the panhandle. But across the board, turnout was driven up significantly by the overturning of Roe v. Wade, what fell right into the hands of Gretchen Whitmer when she was running against Tudor Dixon, who for most purposes was a Republican who was only put in that position not because she won the primary fair and square, right? Technically, she did. But not a true primary. 5 Republican candidates, if we remember this, 5 Republican candidates in Michigan's Republican race. 5 Republicans were disqualified. Why? They forged their signatures to get on the ballot. And I know you might be thinking, if these 5 candidates were forging their signatures, how viable were they in the first place? Well, there was a former Democrat running who was the front runner by far on the Republican side. His name was James Craig, and he was the former chief of the Detroit Police Department. He was coming into this with a tough on crime, I'm a former Democrat, defected type of Democrat, personality type that was going to actually do quite well, because in the preliminary polling, only one Republican was ever able to beat Gretchen Whitmer in polling head-to-head, and it was James Craig. Tudor Dixon was consistently down through Election Day and ended up losing. She was propped up largely because she was the most popular after you took out the 5 most popular candidates. At initial stages, she was polling in the low single digits, propped up by Donald Trump's endorsement after all of this was rushed into the race and everyone was concerned and scared about the state of the Republican Party in the state of Michigan, that it might have detrimental effects for years to come. And also, too, Tudor Dixon completely took the side of pro-life without exceptions multiple times on radio, on TV, and it was used in attack ads. So Whitmer, although, yes, a very strong candidate, absolutely, still needs to be understood and tempered in the fact that she was benefiting by 2018. 2022 was a really strong year for a combination of reasons, and she, again, is a strong candidate who I do think has a serious chance of winning the next presidential election. But 2026 might be a test that might not meet the moment of her presidential bid. Because imagine it plays out this way. Big Gretch has a massive victory in 2018 and 2022. She can go on that debate stage and say, I won a state that Donald Trump won in 2024, that he swung the largest out of almost all of the swing states, and especially out of the Rust Belt. I mean, even Ohio, which was massive for Trump, only swung by 3 points more to him from the last race. But Pennsylvania was just 2.9. Wisconsin was 1.5. Michigan was 4.2. Trump massively swung the state. She can argue, I won by 10 before, I did it twice. But then what happens? If she runs in 2026 and she gets close to losing, or potentially even loses the Senate race in Michigan, what happens? All the presidential bids and all the concerns and all the questions about viability are now brought back up. Can she win if she just lost a nationalized race? The argument will be made that as governor, sure, you're popular. But governor races are very different. Larry Hogan won Maryland by 12 points in 2018 in a blue wave as a Republican governor, yet couldn't win a Senate race in 2024. Why? Because a nationalized race is very different than a localized and one that is contained to the state governor's mansion and the state house. Whitmer might have to face a competitive race in 2026, an undoubtedly competitive one that she might end up losing. So what's my take? I think it's smart for her not to run for the Senate race, but detrimental to Democrats in the sense that she would probably be the best candidate they could field for this race. But for her own personal ambitions, probably not. It's a balancing act for these presidential hopefuls, and that sure, running for Senate would be, again, the best thing Democrats could have for them under the assumption, Whitmer does not want to be the next president of the United States. But we all know that she very much wants to run. And although she doesn't have the high polling numbers that Kamala Harris does, she absolutely has a case to be made for 2028 that could lead us to think that Whitmer could be one of the bigger frontrunners later down the line. She's not polling right now as number 1, number 2, number 3, or even in the top 5, but a lot can change between now and November 2028. And a lot can change, especially if Kamala Harris decides she wants to run for governor instead. 2028 will be an interesting race. And I think the 2026 race in Michigan and in many other states across the country will be a litmus test for many of these Democrats. Whitmer, who can't run for re-election, is unlike that of Governor Josh Shapiro, who has to run for re-election in 2026. And run for re-election he shall. And the candidates and their performances and their results here will tell a story about who is truly the most viable candidate for 2028. And we will see, as the races come in on election night in 2026, what they tell us, and they will tell us a lot about future candidacies. But for now, Whitmer seems to be looking like she's going to take a position on the back burner and decide that she's not running for Senate right now. But she absolutely is running for something in the future. You don't co-chair a national campaign and cozy up to an incumbent Democratic president and establish your own PAC that is focused on campaigning and electing Democrats outside of your state. You don't pass up a Senate bid that could be a layup for all the purposes are for Gretchen Whitmer and decide that I'm just retiring from politics. Because unlike Gary Peters and unlike many of the other Democrats who might, sure, be leaving politics for reasons that are personal, reasons that are saying, I'm done working in elected office. That's an entirely fair point. And to Gary Peters' defense, right, he's retiring around the same age that most people would expect a politician to do so. But for Gretchen Whitmer, she clearly has something cooking in the kitchen. And whether that's establishing more about her PAC, or building out her bigger name ID, it is all under this general anticipation that she will be running to be the next president of the United States, and chances are, with moves like this, she's making the right strategic decision as of right now that makes the most sense for her and arguably, maybe not necessarily for Michigan Democrats, but for her elected office in the future should she get it. Going from governor to president is a much better pathway than governor to Senate for a year, then to the presidency. She'd be argued and pushed up with the inexperience and all these different things, and I could see the attack gets formed if she decides to run for Senate and then jump ship immediately to run for president of the United States. So, interesting so far. I do think that Whitmer is in a uniquely, difficult position deciding here, but making it clear she's not running for Senate means she's guaranteed, likely, to run for president of the United States, and I do think that taking the analysis into account, this was the right decision for her. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 post-election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.